Whispers of the beast bride travelled faster than the storm winds tearing through the Blackwood territory. Soldiers claimed her face was a ruin of melted flesh, a punishment from the moon goddess herself. Villagers swore she was hidden away in a cellar for 20 years to spare her father the shame. Today, Caelan Blackwood, the ruthless Alpha King who had slaughtered legions to secure his borders, wasn't marrying for love or beauty. He was marrying to end a war. But when the heavy velvet lifted, the collective gasp of the court wasn't for her ugliness. It was for the Alpha King, a man who had never known fear, standing paralyzed before his bride, his iron composure shattered by a ghost he thought he had buried. The rain in the Northern Territories didn't wash things clean. It only made the grime permanent. It was a cold, sleeting grey afternoon when the cavalcade from the Southern Pack arrived at the gates of Ironhold. The armoured SUVs, mud-splattered and ominous, looked less like a wedding party and more like a funeral procession. Inside the main hall of Ironhold, Caelan Blackwood stood by the massive stone fireplace. At 32, Caelan was less a man and more a monument to violence. He was 6'4" of corded muscle and scar tissue, his hair the colour of midnight, and his eyes the cold, indifferent grey of a winter sea. He took a sip of whiskey, the amber liquid burning his throat, but it did nothing to settle the agitation in his gut. "They're here, Alpha," Elias said, stepping out of the shadows. Elias was his beta, a man of few words and lethal efficiency. "Victor Mercer has brought the girl." Caelan set the glass down with a heavy thud. "The girl," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "You mean the payment?" "The Treaty of Greystone requires a union," Elias reminded him gently. "Mercer's land for Blackwood protection. His daughter is the seal." Caelan scoffed. "I've heard the rumours, Elias. We all have. Mercer is giving me the daughter he keeps in the basement, the runt of the South. They say she's so disfigured the midwives screamed when she was born." "Does it matter?" Elias asked. "You need her bloodline to legitimize the annexation. You don't need to look at her. You just need to mark her." Caelan adjusted the cuffs of his black suit. He wasn't wearing ceremonial robes. He treated this like a business merger, not a sacrament. "Let's get this over with. I want Mercer off my land before sundown." The great hall was packed. The Blackwood Pack members lined the walls, their expressions hard and judging. They were warriors, survivors of a decade-long border war. They resented this union. They resented that their king had to marry the daughter of Victor Mercer, a man known for his cowardice and greed. When the heavy oak doors groaned open, silence fell like a guillotine. Victor Mercer entered first. He was a small, oily man in an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his diminishing frame. He smiled nervously, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the threats. Behind him walked 2 guards, and between them a figure draped entirely in heavy crimson lace. The veil was thick. It obscured everything. The bride was small, her frame slight beneath the layers of fabric. She walked with a limp, a subtle hitch in her step that the silence of the room amplified. Click-drag, click-drag. "Pathetic," someone whispered from the crowd. "A cripple and a monster," another muttered. Caelan didn't move from the dais. He watched the crimson figure approach. He felt nothing. No pull of the mate bond, no spark of electricity, just the cold calculation of politics. She was a chess piece, nothing more. Victor stopped at the base of the stairs. "King Caelan," he said, bowing too low, "I present my daughter, Isolde Mercer, the jewel of the South." A ripple of dark laughter moved through the room. Everyone knew Lydia, Victor's other daughter, was the beauty. Isolde was the shame. Caelan descended the stairs, his heavy boots echoing on the stone. He towered over Victor, ignoring the older man's outstretched hand. He stopped in front of the bride. She smelled of lavender and something metallic. Fear. Sharp, acrid fear. She was trembling so violently the lace of her veil vibrated. "Isolde," Calen said, his voice flat. She didn't answer. She didn't look up. "The ceremony requires the unveiling," the officiating elder announced, his voice cracking with age, "to prove the identity of the bride." Victor Mercer stepped forward hurriedly. "Is that necessary? My daughter is shy. She is devout. She prefers—" "I don't care what she prefers," Calen cut in, his eyes locked on the crimson fabric. "And I don't trust you, Victor. For all I know, you've brought me a maidservant in a dress." "Lift the veil." Victor swallowed hard. He looked at his daughter, his eyes flashing with a warning that Calen caught but didn't understand. "Isolde," Victor hissed. The girl didn't move. Calen's patience, never in abundant supply, evaporated. "Fine. I'll do it myself." He reached out. The crowd leaned in, a collective breath held. They wanted the horror show. They wanted to see the scars, the twisted features, the monster that justified their hatred of the Mercer bloodline. Calen's fingers brushed the rough lace. The girl flinched, a small pained sound escaping her throat. For a second, Calen hesitated. The sound wasn't the whine of a weak animal. It was the sharp intake of someone bracing for a blow. He gripped the fabric and threw it back. The heavy lace settled around her shoulders. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of disgust. It was the silence of a vacuum, where all the air had been sucked out of the room. Isolde Mercer kept her head bowed, her chin tucked into her chest, her eyes squeezed shut. "Look at me," Calen commanded. It was an alpha command, laced with power. Slowly, painfully, she raised her head. Calen felt the blood drain from his face. His heart, which had beat steadily through battles and assassinations, slammed against his ribs with the force of a battering ram. She was not ugly. She was a devastation. Her skin was pale as moonlight, contrasting sharply with hair the color of spun copper. A Mercer trait, yes, but on her it looked like fire. Her cheekbones were high and sharp, her lips full and painted a deep red. But it was the scar that held him. A jagged, silvery line ran from her left temple, slicing through her eyebrow, missing her eye by a millimeter, and ending at the corner of her mouth. It didn't make her hideous. It made her terrifyingly real. But that wasn't why Calen stood frozen, his hand still suspended in the air. It wasn't the scar, it was her eyes. One was a soft, human hazel. The other, the one bisected by the scar, was a brilliant, fractured gold. A wolf's eye. Calen knew that eye. He knew that scar. Flashback. 15 years ago, the border skirmish at Greystone Ridge. A boy of 17, Calen had led a raid. He had cornered a child in the woods, a girl spying for the enemy. He had swung his blade, not to kill, but to warn. The girl had turned. The memory hit him like a physical blow. "You," Calen whispered, the word barely audible. Isolde opened her eyes fully. There was no seduction in them, no pleading. There was a steel core of hatred so potent it nearly knocked him back. "Hello, Calen," she said. Her voice was rasping, unused but steady. Victor Mercer stepped forward, mistaking the silence for rejection. "The scar is unfortunate, King Calen, an accident in her youth, but I assure you she is fertile and—" "Get out," Calen said. Victor blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said get out," Calen roared, the sound shaking the banners on the walls. He spun on his heel, turning his back on the bride, his chest heaving. "Clear the hall! Everyone out! Now!" "But the ceremony," the elder stammered. "There will be no ceremony today," Kaelin bellowed. He looked at Elias, his eyes wild with a panic no one had ever seen in the Alpha King. "Lock her in the North Tower. Guard the door yourself. If she speaks to anyone, if she tries to leave, kill her." Isolde didn't scream. She didn't cry. As the guards rushed forward to seize her, she just watched Kaelin's back. A small, cold smile touched her lips, twisting the scar into something dangerous. She had arrived as a sacrifice. But as the guards dragged her away, Kaelin Blackwood realized with a dawning horror that he hadn't let a bride into his home. He had let in a bomb. The North Tower of Ironhold was a relic of a crueler time. It had no heating, and the stone walls wept moisture. It was where Kaelin's grandfather used to keep problematic diplomats. Now it was Isolde's bridal suite. Isolde sat on the edge of the narrow cot, her crimson wedding dress pooling around her like spilled blood. She shivered, but not from the cold. She shivered from the adrenaline crash. She had done it. She was inside. She reached into the bodice of her dress and touched the cold, hard vials taped against her ribs. 3 vials. 1 for the water supply, 1 for the Alpha's personal decanter, and 1 for herself if things went wrong. "You're a fool, Father," she whispered to the empty room. Victor thought he was sending a lamb to slaughter to buy himself time. He didn't know Isolde had spent the last 10 years in the library and the training yards, learning poisons and pain, preparing for the day she could destroy the man who ruined her face. The heavy iron door groaned. Isolde stiffened, her hand dropping from her bodice to her lap. Kaelin entered. He had shed his jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing the dark ink of tattoos creeping up his neck. He carried a heavy iron key ring and a bottle of whiskey. No glass. He didn't close the door. Elias stood in the hallway, his hand resting on his sidearm, watching. Kaelin paced the small room, his agitation filling the space. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the hall. "Mercer told me you were soft in the head," Kaelin said abruptly. "He said you were mute." "Victor says a lot of things," Isolde replied. Her voice was low, melodic but scratchy. "He also said you were a king. You look more like a jailer." Kaelin stopped pacing. He leaned against the stone wall, crossing his arms. "That scar. I gave that to you." It wasn't a question. Isolde reached up, tracing the jagged line with a fingernail. "Do you want an apology for dulling your blade?" "I was a boy," Kaelin said, his voice hard. "It was war. You were in the wrong territory." "I was 7 years old, Kaelin. I was picking berries." "You were scouting. I found the maps in your basket." "I was drawing flowers," she snapped, the first crack in her armor. She took a breath, composing herself. "It doesn't matter. History is written by the victors, or in this case, carved into the losers." Kaelin took a swig from the bottle. He looked haunted. The rumors about the Alpha King said he was a soulless killing machine. But Isolde saw the tremor in his hand. He remembered. He felt guilt. Good, she thought. Guilt makes a man sloppy. "Why are you here, Isolde?" Kaelin asked, narrowing his eyes. "Victor didn't send you just because he hates you. He's plotting something. Is it an assassination? Are you the blade?" Isolde stood up. She was short, barely reaching his chin, but she held herself with the dignity of a queen. "Look at me, Kaelin. Look at my leg. Look at my face. I am the daughter no one wanted. I am the currency he used to buy your protection. If you think I am a weapon, you give Victor Mercer too much credit." Kaelin studied her. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of rain, whiskey, and raw power. The proximity made her wolf, the broken, dormant thing inside her, whine softly. He reached out and grabbed her chin, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed the scar again. His touch was electric, jarring. "You have the eyes of a Luna," he murmured, almost to himself. "That gold fleck, it's not natural. It's a birth defect," she lied smoothly. "Another reason they call me a monster." "They call you ugly," Kaelin corrected. "They are blind." The air in the room shifted. The hostility was still there, but something else threaded through it. Tension. Curiosity. Kaelin dropped his hand abruptly, as if burned. "You will stay here. The wedding is postponed, but the alliance stands. You are under my protection, but you are also my prisoner until I figure out what game your father is playing. And if I refuse?" "Then I throw you out the gate," Kaelin said, walking to the door. "And the wolves in the woods, the real ones, will finish what I started 15 years ago." He stepped out, and the heavy door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Isolde waited until the footsteps faded down the corridor. She let out a breath she had been holding for an hour. She moved to the narrow slit of a window. Below, the courtyard was swarming with Blackwood soldiers. She wasn't safe. She was in the belly of the beast. But Kaelin Blackwood had made a fatal error. He thought her scar was a mark of victimhood. He didn't know it was a reminder. Every time she looked in the mirror, she remembered hate. And hate was a fuel that burned hotter than any fire. She tapped the vial against her ribs again. "Postponed," she whispered, echoing his words. "Not for long, husband. Not for long." The next morning, Ironhold was a fortress of stone and secrets, and by sunrise the secrets were already spreading. The servants whispered in the kitchens. The king didn't mark her. He locked her up. "She's a witch." She enchanted him. Kaelin sat at the head of the long table in the dining hall. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the 7-year-old girl screaming as his blade slipped. He had spent years telling himself she had died, that it was a mercy. Finding out she was alive, and that he was now contractually bound to her, was a cosmic joke. "She needs to eat," Elias said, dropping a plate of food onto the table next to Kaelin. "The staff is refusing to go up there. They're afraid she'll curse them." Kaelin rubbed his temples. "Superstitious idiots. She's a 20-year-old girl with a limp, not a sorceress." "She's Victor's daughter," Elias countered, "and she has that eye." "The pack is uneasy, Kaelin. You need to show her. You need to normalize this." "Normalize?" Kaelin laughed, a harsh barking sound. "I locked my bride in a tower on our wedding night. There is no normalizing this." "Bring her down to dinner tonight," Elias suggested. "The pack elders will be here. If you hide her, it looks like weakness. It looks like you're ashamed. Or worse, afraid." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "I fear nothing." "Then bring her down." Isolde spent the day mapping the room. She found a loose stone near the fireplace. She found that the window overlooked a steep drop into the river. An escape route, but a suicidal one. When the guard came to fetch her for dinner, she didn't argue. She had to play the part. She didn't have fresh clothes. She was still wearing the crimson wedding dress, though she had ripped the heavy lace train off to make it easier to walk. It gave her a disheveled, wild look. The guard marched her through the winding corridors. Ironhold was beautiful in a brutal way. Tapestries depicting hunts, chandeliers made of antlers. It was a masculine, aggressive house. When she entered the dining hall, the conversation died instantly. There were 12 people at the table, the elders, the inner circle. Kaelin sat at the head. He looked tired. He watched her limp across the room, his face unreadable. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the chair at his right hand, the Luna's chair. A murmur of dissent went through the elders. "Is that wise, Alpha? An older woman named Mara asked. She had eyes like flint. "The chair is for the pack, Mother. This girl is a guest. She is my wife by treaty," Kaelin said coolly. "Sit, Isolde." Isolde sat. She kept her chin up, exposing the scar to the candlelight. She saw them flinch. She saw the disgust. "So," Mara said, stabbing a piece of venison. "Tell us, girl, is it true your father kept you in the dark because you have fits of madness?" Isolde poured herself a glass of water. Her hand was steady. "My father kept me in the dark, Lady Mara, because I read more books in a week than he has read in his life. He fears intelligence more than he fears madness." Silence. Kaelin hid a smirk behind his goblet. "And the scar?" A man named Jax sneered. "Did you get that from reading?" Isolde turned her bi-coloured gaze to him. "No, I got that from a blackwood blade." She looked directly at Kaelin. The table erupted. "Liar! Slander! How dare she!" Kaelin slammed his hand onto the table. "Enough!" The room froze. "She speaks the truth," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I gave her the mark. During the Greystone raids." The elders looked between their king and the girl. The dynamic shifted instantly. She wasn't just a stranger. She was a victim of their war. It made her presence complicated. "Why tell them?" Isolde asked quietly, leaning toward him. "Why admit to hurting a child?" "Because I don't hide my sins," Kaelin replied, meeting her gaze, "unlike your father." "You don't know my father," Isolde said. "I know he sold you." "He didn't sell me," Isolde said, her voice turning icy. "He deployed me." Kaelin frowned. "What does that mean?" Suddenly, the doors to the dining hall burst open. A bloodied sentry stumbled in, collapsing to his knees. "Alpha!" the sentry gasped. "Breach! The southern perimeter!" Kaelin was on his feet in a second. "Mercer!" "No," the sentry wheezed. "Rogues. Hundreds of them. They bypassed the patrols. They knew exactly where the gaps were." Kaelin looked down at Isolde. His eyes were accusing. "How?" Isolde remained seated, calm amidst the chaos. "I told you, Kaelin. My father deploys things. He didn't send me here to be a bride." She picked up a knife from the table. The guards drew their weapons. "He sent me here to be a distraction," Isolde said. "Seize her!" Elias shouted. "Wait!" Kaelin ordered. Isolde flipped the knife and drove it into the table, pinning the map Elias had laid out earlier. "They aren't at the south perimeter," Isolde said, her voice cutting through the noise. "That's a feint. The rogues are mercenaries paid by Victor. They're coming through the aqueducts, the water tunnels." Kaelin stared at her. "Why should I trust you? You just said you were deployed." "Because," Isolde stood up, her eyes blazing, "Victor Mercer burned my face. You just cut it. If anyone is going to kill my father, Kaelin Blackwood, it's going to be me." The twist hung in the air. The ugly bride was offering an alliance. Kaelin looked at the knife, then at the woman. He had to make a choice. Trust the enemy in his house, or watch his kingdom burn. "Elias," Kaelin barked, "take the elite guard to the aqueducts." "Alpha, if she's lying—" "Go!" Elias ran. Kaelin turned to Isolde. He grabbed her arm, not gently. "If you are playing me, Isolde, I will make the scar on your face look like a beauty mark compared to what I do to the rest of you." Isolde smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. It was a terrifying smile. "Then hand me a sword, husband. Let's go welcome the guests." The descent into the aqueducts was not a journey for the weak, nor for the finely dressed. The air grew heavy, smelling of wet stone, sewage, and the ancient rot of the earth. Kaelin moved with the silent, predatory grace of an apex predator, his boots making no sound on the slick, mossy stones. Behind him, the elite guard, 6 men and women, hand-picked for their brutality, moved in formation. And in the center of them, limping but refusing the offer of a supporting arm, was Isolde. She had torn the crimson skirt to her knees, binding the excess fabric around her waist like a makeshift corset. She had discarded the heels and was now barefoot on the cold stone. To the soldiers she looked like a ruined princess. To Kaelin, who kept glancing back at her, she looked like a woman walking to her execution with her head held high. "Hold," Kaelin signaled, raising a fist. The group froze. The tunnel ahead branched into 3. The sound of rushing water echoed from the center pipe, masking any footsteps. "Which way?" Kaelin whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the subterranean river. Isolde stepped forward, pushing past a growling guard named Holloway. She closed her eyes, tilting her head. She wasn't listening. She was smelling. "The center tunnel carries the fresh water from the reservoir," she murmured. "The right tunnel is sewage outflow. The left is the old maintenance shaft. It's dry." "So they'd take the dry one," Holloway whispered. "No." Isolde opened her eyes. The gold fleck in her left eye seemed to glow in the dim torchlight. "My father's men aren't just soldiers, Kaelin. They are altered. They run hot. They need water to cool their temperatures or they burn out. They'll take the center. They'll wade through the river." Kaelin stared at her. "Altered? What are you talking about?" "Victor has been experimenting," she said grimly, "mixing wolf blood with synthetic adrenaline and nightshade. He calls them hollows. They don't feel pain. They don't stop. But they overheat." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp air ran down Kaelin's spine. If Mercer had created berserkers, Ironhold was unprepared. "Elias," Kaelin commanded softly, "take Holloway and Jax to the left, just in case. The rest of you with me. Into the water." He looked at Isolde. "You stay here. Hide in the alcove." "Don't be stupid," Isolde snapped, grabbing a discarded metal pipe from the ground. It was rusted and heavy, a crude bludgeon. "If they are hollows, you need to know how to kill them. You can't just throat-rip them. You have to sever the spine or take the head. Completely." Kaelin wanted to argue, but the sound of splashing water ahead cut him off. They were here. "Lights out," Kaelin ordered. The tactical flashlights clicked off. The tunnel plunged into pitch blackness, save for the faint bioluminescence of cave moss and the superior night vision of the wolves. The splashing grew louder, chaotic, fast. Suddenly, a roar echoed off the stone walls, a sound that was half wolf, half industrial grinder. "They're on us." The engagement was instant and brutal. Shadows collided in the knee-deep water. Kaelin launched himself at the lead attacker, a massive hulk of a man whose veins pulsed with a glowing violet distension. Kaelin's claws, sharp enough to shear through steel, raked across the man's chest. The attacker didn't even flinch. He backhanded Kaelin with force enough to crack ribs, sending the Alpha King flying into the stone wall. "Head!" Isolde screamed from the darkness. "Take the head!" Kaelin shook the dizziness from his brain. He saw his guards struggling. These enemies didn't fight with technique. They fought with the frenzy of rabid dogs. One of Kaelin's men went down, screaming as teeth tore into his shoulder. Kaelin roared, his alpha aura flaring, filling the tunnel with oppressive dominance. Usually this would force submission, but the hollows didn't react. They were chemically lobotomized against the Alpha Command. A hollow lunged for Kaelin, jaws snapping. Kaelin ducked, grabbed the man by the vest, and used the enemy's momentum to slam him into the water. He didn't claw, he twisted. With a sickening crack, he snapped the neck. The body went limp. But behind him, another shadow rose. Kaelin was off balance, turning too slow. Thwack! A metal pipe swung out of the darkness with the precision of a metronome, connecting solidly with the attacker's temple. The skull caved in with a wet crunch. The hollow dropped. Isolde stood there, breathing hard, the rusted pipe gripped in both hands. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, the scar standing out in stark white relief against her flushed skin. "Behind you!" she yelled. Kalen spun, decapitating the next attacker with a sweep of his claws. The battle lasted 3 minutes. It felt like 3 hours. When the silence returned, the water around them was thick with dark blood and the strange violet fluid of the hollows. 7 enemies dead. 2 of Kalen's guards were badly wounded. Kalen stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. He looked at the bodies. They were grotesque, muscles swollen to the point of tearing, eyes rolled back, foam at the mouth. He looked at Isolde. She was leaning against the wall, favoring her bad leg more than usual. She wasn't looking at the bodies with fear. She was looking at them with recognition. "You knew them," Kalen said, wading over to her. The water swirled around his waist. Isolde nodded, her expression hollow. She pointed to the one she had killed with the pipe. "That was Toran. He was the stable boy. He disappeared 6 months ago. My father said he ran away to the city." She looked up at Kalen, and for the first time, he saw tears in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from rage. "He turns his own people into cattle, Kalen. That is what you invited into your home." Kalen reached out. He didn't think about it. He took the bloody pipe from her shaking hands and tossed it into the water. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a grounding touch. "You fought well," he said. It was the highest praise an alpha could give. "I fought dirty," she corrected, wiping a splatter of violet blood from her cheek. "In a tunnel full of monsters, dirty is the only way to survive." Kalen's eyes dropped to her leg. "Can you walk?" "I have to." "No," Kalen said. Before she could protest, he swept her up into his arms. She went rigid. "Put me down, Kalen. I am not a damsel." "You are my ally," Kalen grunted, turning back toward the exit. "And you are slowing us down. If you want to kill your father, you need to save your strength." Isolde hesitated. Then slowly, her body relaxed against his chest. She smelled of sewage and violence, but underneath that, Kalen caught the scent of lavender again. "He's coming for Ironhold," Isolde whispered against his wet shirt. "This was just a probe, a test of your defenses against the hollows." "Then we will be ready," Kalen promised, his voice vibrating through his chest against her ear. "Because now I have his playbook." He looked down at the woman in his arms, the ugly bride, the cripple, the spy. He had never held anything more dangerous or more compelling. The infirmary was chaos, but the Alpha's private study was a tomb of silence. Kalen had ordered Isolde to be brought there, not the tower. He told Elias it was for interrogation, to debrief her on the hollows. Elias had looked skeptical, but obeyed. The study was a massive room of dark mahogany and leather, dominated by a roaring fire. Kalen stood by the window, watching the rain wash the blood from the courtyard below. He had showered and changed into fresh tactical gear, but he still felt the grime of the tunnels on his soul. The door opened. Isolde entered. She had been allowed to bathe. She wore borrowed clothes, black cargo pants that were too long, rolled at the cuffs, and a thick grey sweater that swallowed her frame. Her wet hair was slicked back, exposing the entirety of her face. She limped to the fire, shivering. "Drink," Kalen said, pouring a glass of amber brandy. He handed it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The spark was still there, undeniable and irritating. She took a sip and coughed. "It's strong," she rasped. It helps with the shock. Kalen leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. My perimeter guards found 3 more hollows trying to breach the northern wall. Your intelligence was correct. If we hadn't been in the aqueducts, they would have slaughtered the night watch. Victor likes to strike on the wedding night, Isolde said, staring into the fire. He assumes everyone is distracted. He underestimated you, Kalen said. And so did I. Isolde turned to face him. The firelight danced in her mismatched eyes. So, am I still a prisoner, or am I a guest? You are. A complication, Kalen admitted. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. You saved my life down there, Isolde. But you also lied to me. You entered my home under false pretenses. I told you the truth the moment I could. Did you? Kalen's eyes narrowed. Elias searched your room in the tower while we were in the tunnels. Isolde's posture stiffened. She didn't move, but the air around her grew tense. Kalen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. The liquid inside was clear, viscous, and deadly. He found this taped to the underside of the mattress, Kalen said softly. Nightshade, concentrated mercury, and anticoagulant. A silent killer. Tasteless, odorless. He held the vial up to the light. Who was this for, Isolde? Was it for me? A little drop in my whiskey to make me sleep forever? Was that the plan? Kill the Alpha, open the gates, let Daddy in. Isolde set her glass down on the mantelpiece. The glass clicked loudly in the silence. It wasn't for you, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched at her sides. Don't lie to me, Kalen roared, his control snapping. He slammed the vial onto the desk, not breaking it, but making the point clear. I saw you kill that man in the tunnel without blinking. You are capable of violence. Admit it. You were sent to assassinate me. It wasn't for you, Isolde shouted back, stepping toward him, her limp forgotten in her anger. You arrogant, self-absorbed. Do you think everything is about you? Then who? The Beta? The Elders? It was for me. The scream tore out of her throat, raw and jagged. Kalen froze. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a sudden, confused coldness. What? Isolde was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked small again, fragile. It was for me, she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. She hugged herself, wrapping the oversized sweater tighter. Victor told me. He told me that when you saw my face, you would give me to your soldiers, that the Blackwood Pack were savages, that you would torture me for sport before you killed me. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I brought the poison so I could choose how I died, Kalen. If you touched me, if you tried to hurt me, I was going to swallow it. Kalen felt like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at the vial, then back at the woman. The realization of what she had lived through, the level of terror she had existed in for weeks leading up to this wedding, washed over him. She hadn't come to kill a king. She had come prepared to commit suicide to escape a nightmare she had been sold into. Isolde, Kalen whispered. He stepped closer. She flinched. It was a small movement, ingrained by years of abuse, but Kalen saw it. It broke something inside him. I am not your father, Kalen said fiercely, and I am not the monster he told you I was. I know, she said softly. I know that now. A monster wouldn't have carried me out of the tunnels. A monster wouldn't have hesitated when he saw my face. I didn't hesitate because of the scar, Kalen said. He was standing right in front of her now. He could feel the heat radiating from her body. I hesitated because I remembered the girl in the woods, and I regretted every day that I hurt her. He reached out, slowly this time, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He cupped her cheek, the scarred side. His thumb traced the jagged ridge of skin that ran to her mouth. "You are not ugly, Isolde," he murmured. "You are the only real thing in this entire cursed kingdom." Isolde looked up at him, searching his grey eyes for deceit. She found none. For the first time in her life, a man was touching her face, not to hurt, not to inspect, but to admire. The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't the sharp danger of the tunnels. It was heavier, hotter. Kaelan leaned in. He wasn't thinking about the treaty, or the war, or the poison on the desk. He was thinking about the shape of her mouth. "Alpha," a voice cut through the intercom on the desk. Kaelan squeezed his eyes shut and let out a frustrated growl. He dropped his hand from her face, but didn't step back. He pressed the button on the desk. "What?" he barked. "Elias here." The voice crackled. "You need to see this. We've decrypted a phone we found on one of the bodies. It's a message from Victor. Read it. It says, 'Phase 1 complete. The seed is planted. If the girl hasn't used the vial yet, trigger the secondary protocol.'" Kaelan stared at the intercom. He looked at Isolde. "Secondary protocol?" Kaelan asked. Isolde's face went pale. "The vial," she whispered. "Where did you find it?" "Under the mattress," Kaelan said. "You said you taped it there." "I did," Isolde said, her voice rising in panic. "But I taped 3 vials there. One for me, one for backup, one—" She stopped. Her eyes went wide with horror. "One was for the water," she whispered. "I lied to you before. I didn't bring 3 vials. I brought one. Just one. For myself." Kaelan looked at the vial on the desk. "If you brought one, and Elias found this one, then who put it there?" Isolde asked. "And where are the other ones?" The realization hit them both at the same time. "There is a spy in Ironhold," Kaelan said, his voice deadly calm. "Someone inside the house planted more poison in your room to frame you, or to ensure the job got done if you failed. Trigger the secondary protocol." Isolde repeated the message. She looked at Kaelan. "The water supply, the reservoir, if they can't invade through the tunnels. They will poison the pack from the inside," Kaelan finished. He grabbed his radio. "Elias, shut down the main water valves. Now! Don't let anyone drink from the taps." "It's dinner time, Alpha." Elias's voice came back, laced with confusion. "The mess hall is full. Everyone is eating." Kaelan's blood ran cold. He looked at Isolde. They didn't need to speak. They turned and ran. Kaelan burst through the doors of the study, Isolde limping fast behind him. They sprinted down the hallway toward the mess hall. But before they even reached the double doors, they heard it. The sound of coughing, hundreds of throats, choking at once. Then the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Victor Mercer hadn't sent an army. He had sent a plague, and he had used his daughter as the perfect diversion to deliver it. Kaelan slammed into the mess hall doors, throwing them open. The scene before them was a nightmare. Soldiers, women, even children, clutching their throats, foam spilling from their lips. "No," Kaelan breathed. Isolde pushed past him. She scanned the room, her mind racing through chemical formulas. She grabbed a pitcher of water from a table, sniffed it, and smashed it on the floor. "It's not the nightshade," she screamed, her voice cutting through the panic. "It smells like almonds. It's cyanide. Synthetic cyanide." She turned to Kaelan, grabbing his tactical vest. "I need sulfur and sodium nitrite. Do you have a medical bay?" "Yes," Kaelan said, snapping out of his shock. "Get me there," Isolde commanded, looking every bit the queen she was meant to be. "I can make an antidote, but I need time, and you need to keep them alive until I get back." Kaelan looked at his dying pack. Then he looked at his wife. "Go," he said. "Save them, Isolde, and I will give you the head of Victor Mercer on a silver platter." She ran. Kaelan stepped into the hall of dying wolves, his roar of command shaking the rafters, forcing their bodies to fight the poison, willing them to hold on. The war had truly begun, and the ugly bride was the only hope they had left. The medical bay of Ironhold was a gleaming white expanse that now smelled of vomit, distress pheromones, and impending death. Isolde moved through the chaos like a storm. She had tied her oversized sweater around her waist, working in a stained undershirt, her copper hair tied back in a messy knot. The scar on her face was stark under the harsh fluorescent lights, but no one was looking at it with disgust anymore. They were looking at her with desperation. "I need the sodium thiosulfate," Isolde screamed at the head physician, a trembling man named Dr. Eris. "And get the oxygen masks on the children first. Their metabolic rate is faster. The cyanide will take them in minutes." "We don't have enough synthesized thiosulfate," Dr. Eris stammered, his hands shaking as he held a convulsing patient down. "We have raw compounds in storage, but—" "Then bring me the raw compounds!" Isolde shoved him aside, grabbing a beaker. "I'll synthesize it myself. Move!" She didn't wait for permission. She limped to the lab station at the back of the bay. Her hands, usually so still, flew across the equipment. She lit a Bunsen burner, the blue flame roaring to life. She grabbed jars of sulfur and sodium nitrite, measuring them by eye. This was her world. For years, locked in her father's cellar, books had been her only escape. Chemistry wasn't just a subject. It was a way to understand how the world was built and how it could be taken apart. Victor had wanted a weapon. He had inadvertently created a savior. The doors to the medical bay hissed open. Kalen staggered in. He looked terrible. His skin was grey, sweat beading on his forehead. Using the alpha voice to command the bodies of 300 wolves to keep breathing was spiritually and physically draining. He was holding death back by sheer force of will, but his grip was slipping. "Isolde," he rasped, leaning against the doorframe. "We're losing them." "Almost there," she muttered, not looking up. The liquid in the beaker turned a violent shade of purple, then cleared to a pale blue. "Temperature needs to stabilize. Come on." "Isolde!" Kalen's knees buckled. Elias caught him. "Hold him up!" Isolde yelled. She grabbed a syringe, drew the hot liquid directly from the beaker, and ran toward the nearest patient, a young girl, no older than 10, whose lips were already blue. Isolde jammed the needle into the girl's thigh. "Breathe!" she commanded, not with alpha power, but with human desperation. For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The room was silent, save for the beeping of monitors and the ragged breathing of the dying. Then, the girl gasped. A deep, racking cough shook her small frame. The blue tint on her lips began to fade, replaced by a flush of pink. "It works," Dr. Eris whispered. "By the goddess, it works. Don't celebrate," Isolde barked, tossing the empty syringe to him. "Mass produce this ratio, now. Everyone who can stand, help administer it." The medical bay exploded into organized action. Isolde was everywhere at once, correcting dosages, soothing terrified mothers, checking vitals. She was limping heavily, her bad leg screaming in protest. But she didn't stop. Kalen sat on a gurney, watching her. Elias had administered the antidote to him first. The fog in Kalen's mind was clearing, replaced by a sharp, piercing clarity. He watched the woman he had called a payment. He watched the monster save his pack. She was covered in chemical stains and sweat. Her scar was angry and red, and she was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. "She's not a runt," Elias said quietly, standing beside him. "She's a Luna." Kalen nodded slowly. "Yes, she is." But the night wasn't over. As the chaos subsided and the stable patients were moved to the recovery ward, Isolde retreated to the back lab to clean the equipment. She was exhausted, her hands finally starting to shake as the adrenaline crashed. She turned on the tap to wash a beaker, the water running clear. "You're quite the chemist," a voice said from the shadows of the supply closet. Isolde froze. She recognized that voice. It was the sneer from the dinner table. Jax stepped out. He was holding a silenced pistol. In a room full of wolves, a gun was usually a joke. But Isolde was human, and she was tired. "Jax," she said, keeping her back to the sink. "I wondered who let the hollows into the aqueducts." "Victor pays in gold," Jax shrugged, walking closer. "Kalen pays in honor. You can't eat honor." "You poisoned your own kin," Isolde said, her hand inching toward a glass jar of hydrochloric acid on the drying rack. "I didn't poison them." "You did?" Jax smiled, a cruel twisting of lips. "That's the narrative. The crazy Mercer bride poisoned the pack. I killed her to save everyone. A tragedy. Kalen will know. Kalen will be dead soon enough. The secondary protocol wasn't just the water, sweetheart. It was the invasion force waiting for the pack to be sick." Jax raised the gun. "Goodbye, monster." Isolde didn't scream. She didn't beg. She did the only thing a Mercer knew how to do. She fought dirty. She grabbed the jar of acid and didn't throw it at him. He was too far away. She threw it onto the floor between them, smashing the glass. The concentrated fumes hit the air instantly, a cloud of burning, choking vapor. Jax coughed, his eyes watering, his aim wavering for a split second. That was all she needed. Isolde lunged, not away from him, but toward him. She ignored the pain in her leg. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray and drove it downward. She didn't have wolf strength, but she knew anatomy. She knew exactly where the femoral artery was. Jax screamed as the blade sank into his thigh. He backhanded her, sending her flying into the metal cabinets. She hit the ground hard, taste of copper in her mouth. Jax roared, raising the gun again, blood spurting from his leg. The door to the lab was torn off its hinges. It wasn't opened, it was obliterated. Kalen Blackwood stood there. He didn't look like a king. He looked like the god of death. His eyes were entirely black. The wolf had taken the wheel. Jax turned, eyes wide. "Alpha, Kalen didn't let him speak. He crossed the room in a blur of motion. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He grabbed Jax by the throat and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. "You touched her," Kalen growled, the sound vibrating the glass in the windows. "She's Mercer," Jax choked out. "She is my mate," Kalen roared. With a sickening crunch, Kalen crushed the traitor's windpipe. He dropped the body without a second glance. He rushed to Isolde, dropping to his knees. He pulled her into his arms, checking her frantically for wounds. "I'm fine," she wheezed, clutching her bruised ribs. "Just winded." Kalen buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. Lavender, chemicals, and life. "I thought I lost you." Isolde pulled back, looking him in the eye. "You can't lose me, Kalen. We have a war to finish." "No," Kalen said, his voice hardening into steel. "We don't have a war to finish. We have an execution to carry out." Fueled by the antidote and a thirst for vengeance, the Blackwood pack didn't wait for sunrise. With Isolde guiding the armored convoy through the hidden minefields surrounding her father's estate, the assault was swift, surgical, and brutal. Kalen tore through the manor's defenses, a hurricane of claws and shadow, until they reached the inner sanctum. Victor Mercer cowered on his velvet throne, his empire of cruelty crumbling around him. When he saw Isolde, he didn't beg. He sneered, leveling a shaking pistol at her chest. "I should have drowned you at birth," he spat. "You scarred, broken thing!" Isolde didn't flinch. She stepped past Kalen, walking straight toward the gun, her eyes burning with cold fire. "You're right, Father. You made me a weapon," she said, her voice steady. "And now, the weapon is misfiring." She turned her back on him, dismissing him completely. "He's yours, Kalen." Victor screamed, but the sound was cut short as Kalen ended the tyrant's reign with a single, merciless strike. Days later, the great hall of Ironhold was packed, but the air had changed. There were no whispers of disgust. Isolde stood on the dais, her veil gone, her scar exposed proudly against a gown of deep emerald. Lady Mara, the elder who had once mocked her, was the first to kneel, baring her throat in absolute submission. "They said you were ugly," Kalen whispered, gripping her hand as the chant of "Long live the Luna" shook the rafters. Isolde looked up at him, her mismatched eyes shining. They were blind. "Now they see," Kalen vowed, kissing the jagged line of her scar. The Beast Bride had become the Wolf Queen, and for the first time, the Alpha King bowed. Not to a treaty, but to his mate. And that is the story of how the ugly bride brought an entire kingdom to its knees, not with beauty, but with brains and a backbone of steel. It makes you wonder, how many times have we judged a book by its cover, only to find out the story inside was the most dangerous thing in the room? If you enjoyed this twist on the werewolf romance genre, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were Isolde? Would you have spared your father, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a dark fantasy saga coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and until next time, watch out for the quiet ones.